And of course, I'm happy to give further illustrations.
Not a problem.
But I'll allow.
Yeah, sure. State Council Sangwa, rule of law, still the same question. Are we okay?
Well, it's an ongoing process. A complex concept, but to simplify it, what we are basically, when you look at every aspect of our lives, there is a law regulating literally every aspect of our lives. So when you say rule of law, what you're saying is that basically the law should be supreme. What I want myself is inconsequential between, if I thought there is a conflict between what I want to see happen and what the law says, the law should prevail. I should follow what the law says, not what necessarily what I want. And then secondly, it also means that we are all equal before the law, meaning that whether you are president, you are minister, you are an ordinary person, you are subject to the same law. If as a private citizen I'm found wanting, say I've stolen something, I should be prosecuted in the same way that any other person would be prosecuted. Even though I'm a lawyer, there should be no exception to the fact that I should not be treated differently because I'm a lawyer. And even if you are president, if you have looted, if you have stolen from your own people, I mean, the law expects that at some point you'll be arrested and prosecuted like any other person. So when we say rule of law, we are basically saying we are all subject to the law. Nobody is above the law. That is what we're talking about. And it's an ongoing process. And if you ask me as to whether currently the situation that we have rule of law, overall, when you look at the situation in Zambia, if I thought there was indeed rule of law in Zambia, technically Zambia would not be where it is, would not be as poor as we are. You know, normally lawlessness breeds poverty. And when you have rule of law, invariably, look at all developed countries, there's rule of law. You'll never find a country in the world where there is rule of law, and you find that that country is poor. And normally when you have no respect for the law, and what you breed in the process is mismanagement of public resources, and incompetence, and destruction of the very essence of government. The institutions of government will not be able to operate the way they should. And given where we stand 56 years later, the conclusion is definitely that we have failed in terms of upholding the rule of law.
So I'm sure other follow-up issues to ask as this topic continues being discussed is how did we get where we are. But before we get to that, KBF, your general explanation, rule of law, and where are we as a country?
I totally agree with my learned colleagues on the definition of the rule of law. In simple terms, it's simply that no man is above the law, and we are all subject to the law. But this is a political discussion. So we must extrapolate that and refer to the politics. There is the law in Zambia. For me, my argument would be how we are implementing the law. In other words, who is responsible for implementing the law? One of the most fundamental issues as to the rule of law and its execution is discipline in the leadership. Once there is a lack of discipline in the leadership, once there is a lack of accountability in the leadership, one can argue, as my learned colleague has argued, that the rule of law has broken down. However, there are various institutions that are used to promote the rule of law. For example, the judiciary is one arm which ensures that laws are followed. To that degree, all of us sitting here being lawyers, we appear before courts. Courts make judgments. They make pronouncements. And to some degree, there is a certain measure where we can argue the law hasn't really broken down so much because people are being arrested and prosecuted. If there's a breach of contract, yes, people do sue and go to court. So there is that sense of balance to say we haven't yet reached a level where people are beginning to take the law into their own hands per se. I agree. Recently, there has been this gassing issue, and citizens rose and took the law into their own hands. But that's because they were reacting to a certain situation which they didn't like happening, and they felt the police were not doing their job. The other institution or department is the police. The police are always given mandate to enforce the law. Again, it's about personalities, characters. Who is running the police force? Are they qualified? Are they being funded? Are they being given the necessary tools for them to do their job? I believe we have enough police, but we can have more. But if the funding is not there, the police will look as if they were inefficient. And yet, there's one angle with the police: polarization. Politics has infiltrated the police, and to some degree, the police seem divided. They are loyal to certain quarters of politics, certain quarters of politics, and then you see like there's a breakdown. Another department which is mandated to enforce the rule of law, per se, is what I might term as the general citizenry. Obedience to the law is a personal decision that you make, that you take as an individual. Because if you're going to decide not to obey the law, you will claim you're above the law. Now, the people that have made perhaps my learned colleague suggest very strongly that there is a breakdown of the rule of law is because there is seemingly too much power being vested in political cadres who are causing confusion. Now, if you go to my initial premise, you understand that when you as a politician who is in leadership do not put your foot down and discipline your cadres, it appears as if you're condoning that violence which is going on. I'm aware, for example, that only this afternoon PF cadres were fighting in front of His Excellency the President at the Freedom Statue. How do you misbehave in front of your commander-in-chief and you're the ruling party? That's indiscipline. Now, indiscipline is one thing. The rule of law is another. Did the police arrest anybody? Are the police going to prosecute somebody? That's another issue. So for me, yes, I do agree to some degree. The law has seemingly broken down, but that is because the institutions that are vested with this authority do not seem to be doing their job properly. It also goes to personalities, characters, qualifications, and the kind of training that they receive as and when they're supposed to enforce the rule of law.
All right. Okay. So the other issue is, of course, we have to also center our discussion on who's to blame. But Mr. Haimbe, you gave it in negatives, your description of the
respect about. Quite clearly, there has been a gradual but systematic degeneration in our, if I can call it this, moral fiber as a country. What would not be considered something that a Zambian could do, something that would be considered un-Zambian not too long ago, is now the norm. And so it is a situation where I think in my experience and in my considered view, there is a combination of factors. then you see a situation where, for example, at the societal level, there's this breakdown in the rule of law. I'll give a typical example of a situation that is very pertinent in our country today: the politicization of bus stops and markets, for example. It is almost at a military level, where you find that people who have control of these particular social amenities want to protect their interests so much because, one, they feed from there. There is an illegal scheme going in many of these markets and bus stations where people would take money for the use of those bus stops and markets in order for them to promulgate their own interests. And this might seem like it's a very simple issue, but it is actually a quite serious issue because citizens are being denied the use of these amenities which are supposed to be available to everyone. Now it has become a situation where it is political. If you do not sing the song of a particular political party, you'll be denied access to the use of those facilities. And this then grows from that point. I'm just using this as an example. Now, how does this come back to the question of the rule of law? There is a particular statutory provision contained in the Bus Stops and Bus Stations, Markets and Bus Stations Act, beg pardon, which is clear that these particular amenities are supposed to be run by the local authority. Nobody else. And that out of a bus stop, a bus station, which ought to be run by the local authority. So the local authority is losing income, and citizens are being denied the right to use facilities like any other citizen because of political affiliation. Now, if you do not call that a breakdown in the rule of law, and I've given the basest of examples because it affects you and I, it affects the everyday Zambian. You go, for example, to a taxi rank in Lusaka anywhere, you will see that it's been politicized. You will see that it becomes a situation which would result in conflict if any person who seems not to toe the line of a particular political party attempts to use those facilities. You'll find flags flying at these at these public facilities. I'm made to understand that this is a situation which is nationwide. So really that is the barest example that I can give, which runs in our everyday lives. And if we don't reverse this trend, if we don't reverse this situation, then we are headed for doom. And it begins with the very small little things, the small aspects of our everyday lives, and then it ratchets up into something more major. And why do I say this? We do have a situation right now as we speak where the courts of law have pronounced in respect of a particular bus station in this city that certain individuals should not run that bus station. An injunction order was granted in that particular case. It's active, so I'm trying to avoid saying too much about it for reason of subjudice. And it has been ignored. Where are we headed as a country? This is becoming a situation you see so many times where a lawful order of court is simply ignored because it doesn't meet the aspirations of those who benefit from the wrongs they're doing. It is a dire situation, in my view.
Mr. Sangwa, how did we get here? I know we cannot really heap the blame on the current leaders that we have.
No, it's been gradual.
It's ongoing, but
yeah.
How did we find ourselves at this stage?
You know, it's been gradual. I mean, if you have interest in the history of this country, you will find that at independence, we inherited structures. Now, the independence leaders, for some reason, felt that the structures which were left by the departing colonial government were somewhat constraining. Now, the erosion of rule of law is not something that happens overnight. It's gradual. And what you see is, for example, if you look at it between 1964 up to 1972, you had a multi-party system of government, and the government of the day felt that that was not okay, and you begin to see them chipping. You see, when you say rule of law, it's about you accepting the limitations imposed on you by law. Okay? Now, if the law says you can only employ a person who has a grade 12 certificate, that's it. If you don't have a grade 7 certificate, you can't employ that person. Full stop. Whether it's your relative, is your friend, or what. That's what the law says. Let me give you an example. When I was teaching, when I used to teach, I'm sure Mr. Imbe will recall, you see the Senate set regulation to say, if you have to pass, you have to score 50%. I used to have students who would come and say, but sir, I've got 49%. Why don't you just give me 1% so that I have 50 and pass? My answer was, you know what, if I give you 1, your friend who has 48 will come and say, why don't you give me 2? And then the other one who has 47 says, sir, you have given my friend 2%, why don't you give me 3? And then the other one, and then you just go on like that. And what happens? The whole system would collapse. Now, the rule is, if it is 50, it is 50. You know that you have to score 50 in order to pass. Now, what was I doing? I was respecting the Senate regulations. I didn't make that rule. It simply said 50% is a pass mark. Finished. You depart from that. What happens? The system collapses. And this is what we've been doing over the years. For instance, if you go back, like I have said, you can't just blame it on the current government. It's been gradual. For instance, we had a situation in 1969 where there were limitations on the powers of government. Government said, no, we don't like these limitations. What do? They remove them. The next thing to say, no, we don't want a multi-party, to start competing with other political parties. No, forget it. One party is introduced, where you refuse to accept the limitations placed on you by the Constitution. And what happened? We had 17 years of one-party rule. And then basically, you are talking about the supremacy of the president. The president, as opposed to the law, became supreme. And what happened? By the time of between 1989-90, the country had collapsed, finished completely. Why? Because we did not respect the law. Of course, there were laws. I mean, that's what we talk about. There's a difference between rule of law and rule by law. Rule by law means there is a law authorizing you. You see, there is a difference. Okay, so I'm sure my colleagues know what I'm talking about. Rule by law is not rule of law. You can have any law to authorize you to do anything, but that is not rule of law. Rule of law means accepting the limitations that have been imposed on you. Now, after 91, we have a new system of government. We are now saying we are a democracy, but that is now where you see, because the system is already broken down. By that time, you are reaching 1999. So what you now have is a situation whereby in Kaunda's time, we had rule by law, by the way. Whatever Kaunda did was backed by law. Now here, 91 to date, you find the law says one thing, and what is happening on the ground is totally different. So what you have is a complete state of chaos. There is no respect for the law. And this has been gradual, and this has continued, and it is something that we need to address. Because short of this, you are not far from a failed state. You know, once you have a failed state, it basically means that you're not respecting the law. I mean, let me just give you another example. Let me just give you an example. People are arguing over this same thing about eligibility of President Lungu. Somebody said, oh, you are opposing this thing because you're scared of Lungu because he's the most powerful candidate and so forth. They're missing the point. It is not whether it's the most powerful candidate. It is not whether it's the weakest candidate. It doesn't matter. It's not a question whether I like him or I don't like him. That's not the point. The point is, what does the law say? Okay? Now, when you hear the discourse from those guys in government, clearly it shows they have no respect for the law. Now, when the law says, if you have held the office of president twice, you are not eligible to stand. If you are president, rule of law, if you have respect for the law, it simply means that, guys, you tell your guys, the law says, if I've held the office for twice, I'm not eligible. It means I'm stepping down. When you have a situation like that, then you have a leader who respects the rule of law. That is rule of law. You give respect to the law. You cannot begin to bring this very fancy interpretation of the Constitution when the law is very clear, very unambiguous. We don't engage in a constitutional interpretation unless there is some ambiguity in the law. And yet the language is very clear. If you have held the office twice, you are not eligible.
Right.
Now, it's not about personalities. It's not about whether I like you, I don't like you. No, that's not the point. The point is we have to give respect to the law.
All right. And I'm sure you're almost preempting why we're here. Of course, we have to spend so much time on the issues of eligibility. It's coming from the legal fraternity. You are divided, I should say. And all the explanations, everyone is using the Constitution and article. Maybe at some point today, we will try to use the layman's understanding. But as we still talking of the rule of law, KBF, the journey after 50 years of independence, how did we get where we are, and why are we rating ourselves in negatives?
My colleagues have already alluded to this fact, but I want to speak politically in relation to the economics of the country and what a breakdown in the law does. You see, when you can have the best constitution in the world, but as long as the players who are running office do not respect that constitution and the other laws that that constitution breeds, because the constitution is the Grundnorm giving birth to the other acts, you have a problem. South Africa, for example, was or is argued to have had the best constitution, one of the best constitutions in the world. But between 2008 and 2018, we had the Gupta Gate. Call it state capture in South Africa. We had a president in South Africa who didn't care so much what the constitution said, what his limitations were. He allowed personal interest to override those of the state. We still have the Zondo Commission going on in South Africa today to determine what Zuma did wrong and what he didn't do wrong. Extrapolate that and bring it back home. Once you have laws, as State Council has said, respect the laws. Respect the laws not because you are entitled to some privileges. No, respect the law because that's what the law requires out of you, politician or not. What this does, if you disregard that, is now you begin to eat at what we're terming as the economy. Because you as a politician begins to think and feel you're entitled to certain things. Certain of your friends, you can bend the law. Certain of your associates, you can protect. That defeats the rule of law. One of the most difficult things for any politician not to understand in Zambia is that once governance issues, the rule of law breaks down, the economy automatically suffers. Why? Because unfortunately, one of the pillars of economic development is that the rule of law gives confidence to investors. Local investors and foreign investors, because they know their investment will be protected. They know that when they invest, they will reap according to the laws, according to the invitations that you gave them, according to those which you can argue as invitation to treat. You are saying, if you come to Zambia, this is how Zambia is. These are the rules. This is what you are going to achieve. You can take your money out. There's no foreign exchange restrictions, blah, 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 blah. You give them all these things. Then they say, oh, Zambia is a good destination for tourism. Zambia is a good destination for investment. Zambia is a good destination for the people are friendly. Our labor laws are intact. Those are things we project. Once that breaks down, the economy begins to suffer. The FIC report of 2017, as an example, told us that we suffered 4.5 billion losses due to corruption. Naming ministers in a report. You can't tell me that that is not evidence of corruption. No. There's a serious breach in the way the ministers are relating to the law and how they are conducting themselves. There's a problem with the way we are conducting our procurement. There's a problem in the way we are administering ourselves as a people in the various ministries of government. So it goes down to what my learned colleagues are saying. All the examples being given here are telling us one thing. Once you are in political office, you are the torchbearer to the economy of the country. More so if you're vying for the highest office in the land. You must show that you will respect the Constitution and the other laws and invite and therefore be the one to say, this is what my country can offer you, and I'll protect you, our laws will protect you, the judiciary will treat you fairly, the police will protect your property, will protect your money, etc., etc. Once we don't do that, we're going to have commission after commission, we're going to have truth and reconciliation commissions, we're going to have all those things leading up to nothing. Because politicians, unfortunately, only understand one language, what they want. We must change the kind of thinking, the kind of politicians we are breeding. I think 50 years, 56 plus years after independence, the kind of people we want in political office must be people who think and respect the Constitution. One of the biggest cornerstones of the rule of law is that you need a disciplined, committed leadership that will follow the rule of law. Once that is not there, in terms of character of the persons running the country, you have a problem.
Let me ask you this. You are a presidential aspirant.
Yes.
And let's picture you being president after August 12, 2021.
Yes.
When do we give this? When can we rate this country positive? What time frame would you give us if you were president?
I don't want to market myself.
No. I'm just, that's
I have made my position very clear. I have said the rule of law and governance issues come number one on page 11 of my book. Why is that important? I have said that because I know that's the beginning. Without it, no one is going to listen to you.
Yeah.
No investor, no IMF, nobody. You can go to the IMF on your knees and tell them our people are suffering, we have minimum shortages. They'll tell you, but there are corrupt people in your government. But you're not following this. But you're not following your own rules, your own regulations. How do we help you? That is a very big litmus test that we are failing as a nation. So governance, for me, within 1 year, you must turn it around. There's no question about that. Anybody who's going to be in discipline, fire them. But first of all, before you even pick them to become part of your cabinet, scrutinize them. Muchibemba tutila, ubufumu, amano ya mfumu, iba kabilo. You cannot be a good leader when you've got bad advisors.
Is that the case now?
Do you live in Zambia? Do you live in Zambia, Mr. Scotland? I'm asking you a very simple question.
I wish I could answer. I mean,
if you do, you know what I'm talking about. The kind of advice that the president is receiving today, is it the kind of advice we want? The kind of advisors that he has, are those the best advisors we have?
Well, but the point is, you can't blame the advisors, okay? When things go wrong, the fault is not with the advisors, because the advisors don't get elected. It's the president that gets elected.
Yes, State
and
Council.
when things go wrong,
no, State
the
Council.
buck stops with the
State
president.
Council, I totally agree with you. But the difficulty is you appoint them.
Yes.
And if you're the one appointing them, you must appoint them on merit.
True.
Meritorious merit.
Yeah.
Not on the basis of patronage. No, no. I will not succumb to patronage.
No, no, that is correct.
You either have the brains or you don't have.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the brains, I'll give you another job, but away from me.
Mm.
I want people who are going to be thinking, who are going to be saying no to me and tell me, no, I don't agree
In
with
short,
you.
you don't want employees.
No.
All right.
You want peers, people that will stand up
Correct.
to you.
Correct.
You know,
if for instance, I tell State Council, come and join me in my cabinet, and he says, if I say no, it is no. And because if I give you reasons, I'll say, John, let's argue. I'll be prepared to do that.
Okay.
It's very simple. But you should not fear brains. You discard people with brains, and you bring around you people who are not seemingly going to add value to you. What impression are you giving to the outside world? That's not the message we want to send the Zambians 56 years after independence. No, it's incorrect.
All right. Let's, Ms. Aimbe, let's look at the institutions that should make us abide by the rule of law. One famous former president did say that for Africa to develop, you don't need strong individuals, you need strong institutions. How do we fare in this country?
How do we fare?
Yeah.
It's a very, again, critical point that you're raising. The institutions must be, as a starting point, strong. We must have institutions that are able to deliver an independent and impartial manner of ensuring that the rule of law is followed. Okay? So amongst the key institutions that you're talking about, for example, is your judiciary.
Sure.
Yes, the judiciary is the bedrock of ensuring that the laws of the country are followed. And so that institution is critical, and it must be independent. It must show, not only be independent, but must be seen to be independent. And we have to ensure that the basic principles relating to independence, which guarantee independence, such as security of tenure, and so on and so forth, are truly being followed. Okay? That is a starting point. You're talking about institutions. You also obviously will be talking about your investigative and statutory bodies as enshrined or as created pursuant to Article 235 of the Constitution of the Republic of Zambia. We're talking about the Anti-Corruption Commission, the Drug Enforcement Commission, etc., etc. Now, why are these institutions critical? Because they are the gatekeepers. They're the ones that watch on behalf of citizens to ensure that, for one, the people that hold political office, the people that hold the purse strings of the Republic are doing so in accordance with the provisions of the law, in accordance with the mandate given to them to properly look after our resources. And one key institution, I think, which is relevant to our current situation in this country is the Anti-Corruption Commission. I would like to really focus on that because studies have been done, lots of papers have been done with regard to the impact of corruption on a country, for example, ourselves. Everybody knows that with corruption, then you find that your democratic institutions get undermined if corruption is not properly managed or handled or actually if possible, eradicated. But of course, people are saying that eradication of corruption is almost impossible. But that's an argument for another day. Corruption, it has been shown in various studies. For example, the UNDP in their Tackling Corruption and Transforming Lives report of 2008 showed clearly a link, a nexus between corruption and the retardation of economic development. It also contributes to the ability of government to deliver. Or the inability, as it were, of government to deliver. So, in order for you to address these ills that come with corruption, you must have a strong anti-corruption commission. And we have seen very recently that our anti-corruption commission, the body that is charged with fighting this particular scourge, has shown and continues to show signs of weakness. And so if that institution is not strengthened via, to start with, political will, notwithstanding the rigorous legal regime that might be in place to ensure that the institution is on paper strong, if there is no political will to ensure that the Anti-Corruption Commission has teeth with which to bite in the practical sense of it, then we have a problem. And this is what I think, unfortunately I sound like a doomsayer, but this is what I think we're seeing in this country today. Again, I'll keep on going back to the examples that the viewers out there obviously relate to. We're talking about the issue of the infamous houses that could not be, whose owners could not be found. You look at the institution and you wonder whether it is delivering to the expectations of the Zambian people when matters that are seemingly straightforward and simple cannot even be investigated and dealt with at the level that they ought to be dealt with. You're looking at the cry of many Zambians with regard to the procurement, like Leonard Senior, KBF just mentioned. The procurement systems in the country seem to be failing. You have ridiculous pricing for the purchase of items like ambulances, fire trucks, and we can go back in the recent history and the examples again are plenty to be given. And yet you have not seen a matching sort of delivery by the Anti-Corruption Commission as a key institution in this regard to ensure that that vice is creeps away, is taken care of, as the case may be. Look at even the value that is given to projects, to public spending in respect of road infrastructure and various other developmental projects. There ought to be a watchdog. There ought to be a gatekeeper that takes care of the interests of the citizens. A key institution that is strong enough to stand up to the powers that be and say, this is wrong and we will not allow it as Zambians because it's depriving people of their basic needs. You deprive people of their basic needs when you allow the scourges that we see going on in our country to continue. And the only way you can reverse that trend is first and foremost, as I said, political will, and secondly, ensuring that institutions are strengthened.
Okay, all right. Mr. Sangwa, Zambia, institutions and the rule of law?
You know, the failure of rule of law, I mean, what are institutions? Institutions are human beings. Okay, so when you have failure of rule of law, it's basically failure of the people. And this can be attributed to many factors, possibly having wrong people in the wrong place. I mean, take, for example, again, we don't have to be closed as a country. We can make comparisons with other countries. I mean, take just a typical country like Botswana. Botswana has become independent in 1966. They have maintained their constitution since their independence constitution, of course, with some amendments. And anybody would tell you that Botswana is a unique country in Africa. It's been the only democratic country in Africa which has held regular elections, free and fair elections, by the way. It's been the only country in Africa which has recorded positive economic growth since 1966, and I think they have averaged something like between 5 and 6%. Even during the financial crisis, they were still recording positive growth. That boils down to leadership. When you have leaders, what they did, they didn't throw away whatever they inherited at independence. They embraced it. They accepted it. They accepted to work within the confines of the constitutional order that was left by the colonial government. And they respected that. And if you go to Botswana, yeah, I mean, I know you can't eradicate corruption, but the level of corruption is not the same as it is here in Zambia. It is one of the exceptional countries. What is so special between us and the Swanas is simply the commitment and the love for their country. They are patriotic, okay? And when you respect property, government property, and you don't line up your pocket, you will find that, first of all, the resources of the country will be better managed. And when they are better managed, they'll be better managed for everybody else. And my brother here talked about something very important. When we talk about rule of law, people don't understand how destructive the failure of rule of law is to the country. Okay? All the economic problems that we have right now, first of all, even in GDP terms, such a small country like Botswana, the GDP of Botswana, of course, I'm not an economist, but GDP of a country is one of the main indicators of growth or prosperity of that country. Botswana's GDP is about $8,000 per person. That of Zambia is less than $2,000. Okay, now we're both mineral wealth countries. How has Botswana managed to do that? Rule of law, respect for the law, because if the law says, take it for example, as minister, this is very simple. All the salaries of civil servants are gazetted, by the way. It's something that is known. Now, if all your ministers can simply say, my salary is 10,000, you stick to your salary, you don't line up your pocket, it means that there will be no wastage of resources. But if you think that working in government, the emolument of the salary is too low, then don't go in government. Okay? So if you go there, you should accept what the job is paying you. You don't begin to be creative and inflate, try and rip off the system. Now, that is all wastage, which is going in money that should be properly utilized. It is being stolen. Now, that is the general collapse of rule of law. Because everything, imagine all the salaries, I mean, even the president's salary is gazetted, by the way. It is known how much the president is supposed to get. And that is why, I mean, we for 7 years, we spent time arguing the Chiluba case. People don't learn, okay? People don't learn in this country. Chiluba was prosecuted for 7 solid years for corruption. But we had to look, people had to go and look for evidence and even manufacturing some of the evidence to show that is stop. You even had to involve FBI, serious frauds office in London to look for evidence. But do you think this time we need FBI and serious frauds to look for evidence? No, you won't. Now, these are the problems. People don't learn. They don't learn. Okay? Now, what they think that all those guys who were prosecuted previously under Chiluba's regime, they think they were down. Now, they are smart. No. At the end of the day, we need to respect property. We need to respect and only collect what is due to you. You know, if you think your salary cannot sustain the lifestyle that you have, then don't go. Start business somewhere. But don't go in politics, because politics is not rewarding. Technically, it's not rewarding, unless you have another agenda to line up your pocket. But technically, it's not rewarding. Because the problem you have also with politics is the way it is perceived. You know, when you go, you accept public office. First of all, it's not an achievement, it's a sacrifice. Okay? It's a service you are rendering to the people. But now the question is, how do you go and save the people when you haven't addressed the issue of bread and butter on your own? You know? But when you go, I mean, look at all these developed countries. Mostly people who go into politics are people that are already comfortable. Here is when you have no option. That's when you go in politics. And that's why you have problems. And I think it is up to the citizens to be able to choose wisely, starting from your MPs, your councillor, and so forth. Look at him, first of all. Is he richer than you are? Is he well off than you as the electorate? If he is, then you vote for him. But if he's poorer than you as the electorate, then you have a problem. What do you think he's going to do when he goes into office? You know?
Let me agree. Let me agree with...
These are the challenges you have. It comes down to the quality of leaders that you elect. Correct. I've never aspired to go into public office, by the way, because I'm still struggling to resolve the issue of bread and butter. So I can't go and save my people when I just need to take care of myself first. You know, so that's the problem. So it boils down to the quality of people that you are giving the responsibility to manage state affairs.
True.
You know.
Very true.
All right.
whilst I agree totally with what my learned colleagues have said, I want to take one angle. My learned colleague Mlambo has talked of the judiciary as one of the key institutions that will propel the rule of law to its ultimate, which is true. But you see, the judges are dependent on investigations done by other institutions, because all they do is evaluate the evidence given to them. Now, one of the greatest departments that can be used properly is a very professional police force. The police in Zambia today is a very vital department to enforce the rule of law and maintain law and order and good governance. Unfortunately, we have a problem with the police. One, they're ill-funded. Second, part of their training hasn't changed, as State Council was alluding to. Sometimes you must move with the times. In the colonial days, the police force was used as a mobile unit to curb riots. Part of the training today at Lilai still is about curbing riots. When you've got democracy, people are supposed to express themselves, they're supposed to be free, and they're supposed to make sure that all you do is provide law and order where there's a gathering. Now, when you have a policeman who is trained and he feels that the only way he can enforce the rule of law is by beating people, you have a problem. How do we train our police? It's a good question. Over-interference in the police and abusing the police to do political issues instead of doing a professional policing job, that's another problem. The police needs to be reviewed in terms of its training, it needs to be re-educated, it needs to be retrained, and all the syllabus for me at Lilai right now must change to conform to the democratic dispensation that we have accepted politically. We cannot be teaching the police 1965 tactics today and expect them to govern and enforce the law on people in 2020. It doesn't make sense. One of the institutions that should really be helping the judiciary, should be helping ACC or helping drug enforcement, is the police. Why? Because the police are there to ensure that everything is done in the name of the president. Summons are sent in the name of the president. Warrants are executed in the name of the president. So when you're executing that in the name of the commander-in-chief, you better be sure that as you take a citizen's rights away, you've got the evidence against that citizen. Don't go and lock up people. Then you begin investigations. That's persecution. It's the training. We must begin to change some of the approaches that we're having towards the rule of law and governance issues. If we don't, we are going to have our citizens, like they did recently, take the law in their own hands and say, we don't trust the police. Now, when the citizens don't trust the police, there's a clash. Because the police have got guns and sometimes live bullets. People are killed. The gassing itself, I think, killed 46 people. We don't know the number that was shot by the police. But people were shot, accidentally or otherwise. Mistake or otherwise, people were shot. Now, that's the kind of policing we don't want. Because what you need is a civilized police that are going to investigate. For example, there must also be a distinction between physical policing and intelligence policing. White-collar crimes, for instance, bankers, fraudsters. You don't go and arrest those kind of people on mere suspicion. No. Raid them. Go to their computers. Go to their phones. Go to their records. Trace what they've been up to before you can actually arrest them. Don't just go and knock on someone's door and say, no, then you... No, that's not policing. The rule of law says you, as a policeman, wear a badge. That badge is given to you via your Inspector General of Police, who is commissioned by the President. So you're actually enforcing an order on behalf of the President. You better be very sure before you effect an arrest. Whether you're in plain clothes or you're in uniform, be very sure that you're representing the Commander-in-Chief properly. So we need to retrain these people. Their thinking must change. We need to damage the ignorance of some of these policemen.
Right.
They think when they're wearing a uniform, they have the right to kill. No, you don't. Human life comes first. That person you're shooting at has got human rights. His rights cannot be taken away just by you waving a badge. I'm a policeman. I'm constable number so-so. Do it properly. Another institution that I think is important in terms of the rule of law and its efficacy is simply citizens. I was trying to emphasize this point because citizens alone don't seem to understand their own rights. All they talk about is, no, but the Public Order Act. No, but that's not the only law. You've got other laws. You've got other avenues that you can use. Civil rights is a very important aspect of our development. When you look at the American history, for instance, you had people like Martin Luther King and his movement of civil liberties and stuff like that. Just voting is a civil right. That civil right called voting, if it's abused, it can put the wrong person in office. Bribing people. An institution such as the Electoral Commission has got the right to disqualify a candidate who's going to be bribing citizens for a vote. Do they do that? No. What is the fear? Why can't you disqualify and show, by way of an example, this is wrong. We don't want this kind of behavior by candidates. Set an example. Let people know, oh, the ECZ now has got teeth to bite. Not just have a document on paper, but you're not effective. It goes back to the human beings that State Council referred to. Institutions are names, but who are the human beings behind the names? Do they have the understanding of the authority that they hold? If they don't, train them.
Or the qualifications.
Correct. In other situations, perhaps it's qualifications. Do they know that they have this power? Do they know that they can do this? If they do, I can assure you, they will be able to do it without fear or favor. And then the Zambians will begin to say, oh, as a candidate, I'm not supposed to do this, I'm not supposed to do this, and I can't do this. But you can't have people suddenly just going to donate for the sake of an election. Just going to donate for the... No, no, no. That's unfair. That's unfair. And we cannot manipulate the voters based on the fact that we need them to eat for a short period. And for the next 5 years they are suffering. No, that mentality must begin to change. Citizens must begin to understand they have the power to change government. That is why for us, when we were campaigning in 2011, we said, don't you ever eat the money. But you should know what to do. So whether you have money or not, and I'm warning all these other politicians who think because they've got money, illegally obtained or otherwise, that they can just go and use the money. No. There will be a voter education driven for the voter to understand that the money that you're being given is actually your money, ill-gotten by those politicians giving it to you. Eat the money, but vote wisely. In other words, vote for the character that you think would deliver for you the kind of development that you're looking for. That citizenry kind of thinking must begin to get in the Zambians. And the more people beginning to understand that, and I'm very happy to report that there's a group of cadres now. These are millennials. They don't worry about you talking too much, dancing at rallies and things like that. No, they read. And they begin to understand, I can relate to this person. I think I like this person's ideas. And there's almost 2.5 million new voters to be on the roll. That's enough for you to win an election in Zambia, if you use those people properly. Are we targeting those people? If so, what is the message that we're giving those people, those new voters? What do they want? The youths especially. The young ladies. The young boys on the streets. What do they want? Do they want just to go and dance at rallies? Dust and... those days are gone. No, we must begin to change.
All right. Okay. So later on, at some point, we'll be able to open phone lines and have that direct engagement with our guests. We're discussing the rule of law. And from the explanation of the rule of law, where we are, the institutions that should ensure that this country abides to the rule of law, to ensure that we rate this country in the positive. The biggest question this evening, gentlemen, that we are also discussing, I know Mr. Sangwa just did mention the issue of qualifications, and now let's get to the big debate, the issue of the president and his qualification to stand in the year 2021. This debate didn't start now. There was a court ruling, and all the legal brains keep explaining articles and their stance. But there's a Zambian that doesn't still understand. Let's start with you. How did we start this debate? The court ruling, where we are, and already there are endorsements happening. I know you speak with a bit of interest because you're also aspiring to be president, but as a lawyer.
All right. I'll give this question a historical disposition, and I hope you allow me to think through this.
All right.
The constitution that we're discussing right now is the 1996 constitution. Now, what was the spirit in that constitution? From 1991 to 1996, what did the MMD want to do? Having been ruled under a one-party participatory democracy for 27 years, under the KK regime, the first thing we wanted to do was to change that no political president was going to rule beyond 2 terms. Let's be very clear. That was the reasoning with that constitution which came into play. Now, the 1996 constitution was merely amended in 2016. I want that as a premise so that people understand. So the spirit of the letter of the law is that no president was to exceed 2 terms. We have to make that very clear. Under the 1996 constitution, there was Article 35. Article 35 simply said a person who has been elected twice to office shall not be eligible. It's in mandatory terms. Shall not be eligible to stand again. That means the 2 terms must be respected. However, we must be very clear. A president is given by the Constitution 2 terms to stand of 5 years each. But it's not mandatory that he must serve those 5 years. Let me go deeper so that the common man now can understand. Let's go back to 2006. Under the 1996 Constitution, one Levi Patrick Mwanawasa, State Council, the late, is elected for the 2nd time into office. He was initially elected in 2001. Now he's elected for the 2nd time in 2006 to hold office as president. Unfortunately, he dies. Therefore, in 2008, the Zambian people are forced to go for a presidential by-election in 2008 to elect what? A president. But which parliament is in session here? Please follow me. The lifespan of a president is tied to the lifespan of parliament. He doesn't exist on his own. No. Parliament in 2006 was not dissolved. But the Constitution said if the president dies, within 90 days there must be a by-election. That is how come Bwezani, Rupia Bwezani Banda, became our president in 2008, after the death of Mwanawasa. Parliament was still there. It was not dissolved. The lifespan of Parliament was running. The President therefore had to run. By 2011, His Excellency the President, Rupia Bwezani Banda, was compelled to dissolve Parliament, which was his Parliament now. It means that for all arguments, the President cannot exist without National Assembly. When he attends it, it becomes Parliament. His term is tied to that of Parliament. This is a very important part which I think we have missed here. That is why when he dissolved Parliament, technically he dissolved himself. But the law allows him to remain in office during the election period because there should be no vacancy. It says he must hand over to the next president-elect. 2011, President Sata wins the elections. But 2014, President Sata dies with his parliament in session, elected in 2011. Parliament of 2011 is not dissolved. The presidency has a vacancy because the Constitution has got the 90 days within which to run a by-election. So we go for a by-election for the presidency. Unfortunately for the Patriotic Front at that time, it suffered two problems. They had no presidential candidate. So in 2014, the PF had to go to a convention. The constitution of the PF reads, the person who is elected at the convention becomes automatically the presidential candidate in the general election to run, or in the the presidential by-election to run. His Excellency Edgar Chagwa Lungu was elected as president of PF in 2014 at a convention. On the 20th of January 2015, he was elected to office for the first time, and he found a parliament from 2011 running. His term is tied to this parliament of 2011. This parliament of 2011 was going to be dissolved in 2016. So by law, he was mandated to dissolve that parliament. Just like Rupia Banda, dissolving this parliament in 2016, technically he dissolved himself. It means elections had to be held. 11th of August 2016, His Excellency the President, Edgar Chagwa Lungu, gets elected for the second time with a new parliament, whose life now they begin together. But he has already been elected again in 2015. So he's being elected in 2016 is the second time. Let me just go a bit deeper here. You cannot argue that the president did not hold office, as I've heard some people arguing that the president did not hold office. Let's be serious. The Constitution is a practical document. It speaks life into a nation. We must be very clear. In the current Constitution, Article 105 clearly states, as it did before, how does a president assume office? One, he gets elected, then he is sworn in by the Chief Justice or the Deputy Chief Justice, as the case may be, and then he assumes office. Did that happen for Edgar Chagwa Lungu in 2015?
Twice.
Yes. Did it happen for Edgar Chagwa Lungu in August 2016? Yes. Twice. So he cannot say he has not been elected twice. He has. Therefore, he is caught by Article 106, subclause 3, twice elected. He cannot run again. Just be very clear. Now, people have been saying, no, but the Constitutional Court said, and the no. The life of a presidency as an institution has always been attached to the life of Parliament. That is why when Parliament is dissolved, the President cannot stay in office. Parliament has got power to prolong its life, but in special circumstances. For instance, if there's a war, Parliament can prolong its life for 12 months. They can remain in office and say, no, we are fighting a war. If we go to elections now, there'll be problems. Let's maintain this. But that's not an election. We're talking about being elected. Once you're elected twice, that's it. You're done.
All right. So, like you've said, the debate as well is tied to the Concord ruling. So before you get to that, Mr. Sangwa, you've been on a number of media platforms explaining yourself. But as you also explain, there's a group of Zambians saying that you're on a crusade to advance a particular political interest. They've also challenged you, the Patriotic Front, well, don't hide into legal explanations on the eligibility. Come on the political battlefield so that you declare your political interest. Where is the explanation?
My platform is rule of law. If there's any party that I belong to, it's called the rule of law party. That's my party, you know. And you know, these are governance issues. You know, the problem we have is we are not patriotic as Zambians. I think on average we don't love this country enough to die for. That's our biggest problem. And when somebody disagrees with you, you start name calling and so forth. No. As a lawyer, I took oath to defend the Constitution. And that's all what I'm doing. And I agree fully with my learned brother here, although he's a presidential candidate and I'm not. And my brother here is an aspiring what? MP, and I'm not. So I'm not pushing any agenda. The only agenda I'm pushing is a legal agenda to protect the Constitution. It boils down to the topic we're talking about. When you fail to respect the Constitution, what law are you going to respect? Okay? That is all what that's the agenda I've been fighting for. I'm non-partisan here. And all what I'm saying is that if you are UPND, you are PF, you are whatever, respect the Constitution. That is all what I'm talking about. And in this particular case, you see, the language of the Constitution is very clear, very, very clear. If you go back to history, my friend here started in was this 91. But if you go before 91, you go back to 1964, you find that the election to the office of president, there was no term limit. Okay? So this issue of eligibility of a president, it has evolved. It's not something that has just come from nowhere. No, it has evolved. We have gone through various phases whereby we have seen the harmful nature of allowing a person to stay in office for more than 2 terms or for whatever, for a longer period. So we have changed. It's not a new issue. 1964, there was no presidential term limit. You can go in office for as many times as the people want. 1973, we changed the Constitution. We put in one-party state, okay, one-party rule. The 1993 Constitution did not have a term limit. In fact, the issue of the term limit was discussed for the first time in 1973 by the Chona Commission.
Yes.
Chona Commission expressly stated there are many Zambians. We should limit it to 2 terms to allow for other Zambians to also contest for the highest political office in the land. Chona came up with a recommendation to say, listen, you go for the first 2 terms, but you can't go for the 3rd one. You take a break. Then you can contest the next election after taking a break. These are very conscious issues that we have debated and discussed as a country. It's not new, like the way the PF are trying to make it look like. It's just something that has just morphed today. No. Then after 17 years of one-party rule, we saw what damage can happen to a country when you leave somebody in office for 27 years. This country was broken down, finished. Then we said, never again. We have to put a limit. In fact, if you read the report, first of all, they said, you know, if a person stays in office for too long, there's a potential of him being a dictator. Okay? That's the problem. There's a potential of him being a dictator. And not only that, there is another argument where they say, oh, finish development plan and so forth. They said, listen, if you don't accomplish your political agenda in 2 terms, then you'll never finish it. Okay? They discounted all those arguments. They're not new arguments. That these are things we've gone through. The only problem is that people don't read. That's the biggest problem. When it came to 1991, look at the language. The language of 1991 was, no, a person, the term limit was limited to 2 5-year terms. This is 1991. 1996, we amend the Constitution. We now say, listen, we are moving away to 2 5-year terms. We're simply going to, if you have been elected twice, we don't care how long you serve. You can be elected and stay, serve the 3 years, 2 years, whatever. As long as you've been elected, you have taken oath, you have entered the office of president. By the way, you can't enter the office of president without taking oath. So the moment you take oath, okay, you have entered the office. Okay? So even if after taking oath, a month later you decide to quit, you have already held the office of president. It counts as your first period that you have held office. Now, people, you know, the problem is that we have to be honest, because these are critical issues. You don't bend the Constitution in order to suit you. No, it's a national document. Okay, it belongs to all Zambians. You don't use the Constitution as a political tool. No, you respect it. Okay? The problem we are seeing now is manipulation of the Constitution, where you begin to bring this very abnormal interpretation. Whatever interpretation you have had about saying, no, it's not eligible, is eligible, and so forth, because the term is 5 years. On the limit, it doesn't say that you must serve 2 5-year terms. It doesn't say that. It simply said, now, we move now from 96 to 2016. In 2016, we deliberately changed the language from being elected twice to holding office twice. Now, these terms are very conscious and deliberate choices of the words we have used in the Constitution. They are not by accident. Okay? So, it is clear, if you have held the office of president twice, you are gone. And that is what my plea is. I wrote a letter to the president. I said, respect the Constitution. Don't stand for this election because you don't qualify. This was a couple of months ago. Okay? Now, I have no political agenda to pursue. I have seen the ramifications of disobeying or disregarding the Constitution. Look at it this way. If you just disregard the Constitution, which law are you going to respect? That is what we are dealing with. I'm sorry, I mean, I may sound like I'm agreeing with my friend. I'm sure my friend will also agree. But we are agreeing not because we belong to the same political party. No, because we have looked at the law objectively and sincerely, without not through any political lens or anything like that. That is what the language of the court. We'll talk about the constitutional court, the court ruling. I can go ahead. But the point is this. People are being dishonest. All those that are lying to President Lungu that is eligible. The point is that he's not eligible. You see, they have misinterpreted at Article 106, sub-Article 6. Now, let me give you the background to sub-Article 6. Now, before 2016, there was no provision for a president as a running mate. Right? Now, after 2016, we are saying we don't want any more presidential by-elections. Okay? So, which means you can actually ascend to the office of president without being elected by virtue of the fact that you are vice president. Okay? There are two scenarios that will happen in the event that there is a vacancy. My brother talked about the life of the presidency. The term of office of the president is tied to the life of parliament, of the National Assembly. Okay? It's 5 years, beginning to the end. And there should be no vacuum. The president has to hold office until the next one is elected. Now, the Constitution has now gone further, said, okay, we have now made provision. When a president dies, we don't want by-elections, right? So what do we do in the event that there's a vacancy in the office of president? Two things. If there is a vice president, the vice president is automatically sworn into office. We don't go no more by-election. Okay? What happens if there is no vice president? The Constitution says the Speaker takes over the running of government for about 3 months. And during that period, you must have elections. Okay? Then somebody will get elected. Now, whether a person is elected president under those circumstances or the vice president takes over, they will say for the remainder of the period. Okay? Now, we're talking about vice president or a person who is elected in lieu of the vice president. That's the scenario we are dealing with. Now the Constitution goes further. They said, okay, we have set the limit that you must hold office twice. Now, how do we treat this period for a person who is vice president or who is elected in lieu of his vice president? How do we treat this period? Do we just ignore it or not? Okay? So what the Constitution says is that, listen, if you are vice president or you are elected in lieu of the vice president, if the period you serve is less than 3 years, it will not count. It is talking about vice president or a person elected in lieu of vice president. But if it is more than 3 years, it will count as the first time you have held office, meaning that your next election will be your last one. That's what it means. Okay? Let me give a practical example. Now, the other point is that people that are saying they are relying on sub-article 6 as a reason for that, they're being dishonest. Here is a reason. Sub-article 6 came into place on 5th January 2016. The law does not work backwards. The law takes effect from the day it is passed going forward. Now, that first term that President Lungu held, he didn't hold it, okay, under the Constitution as amended. He held it before. So you cannot apply a law, a situation that happened many months ago, and apply to a law that has been passed today. You can't, unless the law expressly states that. The law doesn't look backwards. The law always looks forward. President Lungu has never been vice president. Okay? And the situation we are dealing with only relates to where the incumbent or the person elected president has died or there is a vacancy for whatever reason. That's the situation we are dealing with. Okay? And that situation we are dealing with is effective 5th January onwards, not backwards. If President Lungu had held it's just crazy, the kind of arguments that you're getting. They're crazy. The point is that it is from 5th January 2016. That is when the Constitution starts operating as amended. So we should be dealing with events that happened after 5th January 2016, not before. You know, anybody who argues, it's just being dishonest. That's all.
Let me just buttress that argument.
Right.
Just one more.
Just quickly.
In relation to this holding of office, because it was an argument I heard and I couldn't help but laugh. First of all, when President Lungu was sworn in on the 20th, or after that, 2015, let me say, the first time he was elected, he held the office of president. Whenever he left the country, he either left the vice president to act or a minister to act. You do not leave someone to act in your position if you're not holding the office. Number one. The president during that period, from 2015 to 2016, attended the United Nations conference as the president of the Republic of Zambia. He represented us. He attended the AU as president of the Republic of Zambia. He attended COMESA meetings. He attended SADC meetings as president of the Republic of Zambia. He signed agreements. Worse still, if that argument has to hold any water, he signed the amended constitution, the one we're discussing, on the 5th of January 2016. Now, a bill passed in Parliament is not a law until it is assented to by the President. There was pomp at the Hero Stadium. The President came to sign that particular constitution in front of the whole world to see as President. Now, if he didn't hold office, who was signing this? An imposter? A fraudster? I beg to differ. I know Edgar Chagwa Lungu. He is not that. Don't put him in that category. No, it is wrong to argue. He was president. He acted as president. He appointed ministers as president. He appointed some judges as president. Let's be serious. Let's not trivialize that situation that occurred during that period. I was vice chairman elections for this party, KBF. I was campaigning for who? A ghost? No. Let's not insult each other.
All right. Remember, we're also live on Joy FM, and like I did say that we'll be able to open phone lines. So you're calling us on 076-3921-997, 076-3921-997. Please, my moral please, let's apply some civility as you give us your comments, contributions, or questions you have for the guest. And just to allow more people to participate on this particular program we're discussing rule of law, be as brief as possible. And you are free to call. Now, Mr. Imbe, I'm still getting back to the other arguments. I wish Mr. Ngolube did come as well to advance their opinions and thoughts as a patriotic front. But the defense is coming from the court ruling that was made some few years back. And, of course, there are explanations here using the Constitution. How do we debate this matter so that we don't lose the thought and opinion of a common Zambian?
Actually, the debate on this matter starts and begins with the ruling of the Constitutional Court, the judgment of the Constitutional Court itself, selected judgment number 60 of 2018. When one critically looks at that judgment, there will be certain key issues that come out from what the Constitutional Court itself said. And that is in respect to these arguments that have been put forward, agreeing entirely with my learned seniors here. The arguments that have been put forth by those that seem to get some political mileage out of claiming that His Excellency, the incumbent president, is eligible to stand. That is not what was stated in the judgment. That's a starting point, because the argument that has been put forward is that the rest of us are now talking utter nonsense, that we should not even speak about this issue.
You're even in contempt.
A closed issue, and that you'll be in contempt of court because you're saying something that is contrary to what the judgment said. Let me put it first and foremost, very clearly that nowhere in the judgment of the Constitutional Court did they pronounce that the president, the incumbent president, is eligible to stand in 2021. That's the starting point, and let's be very, very honest to the people of Zambia out there. Now, allow me to take certain extracts, maybe to put this discussion into its proper context from the judgment itself. Okay, let's begin with the questions that were put forward to the Constitutional Court by the applicants in that matter. This is Reverend Dan Pule and others who sued the Attorney General and asked the Constitutional Court to pronounce itself on the questions as they put them in their amended originating summons. And I'll run through this very quickly. The questions that are relevant are the first two. And they asked the Constitutional Court whether His Excellency, the President, Edgar Chagwa Lungu, will have served 2 full terms for purposes of Article 106, sub-Article 3.
Mr. Amy, just allow me to take one call.
Yep, sure.
Then
I'll hold that thought.
All right, okay. Good evening. You're through to the program. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes,
My
Mr.
name is
Kawe.
Mwendo.
Yes. Be as brief as you can. What is your contribution this evening?
Yes, please. First, good evening to the learned colleagues, State Council Sangwa,
Good evening.
and KBF,
Good evening, sir.
the man of the moment. One thing I've come to realize in Zambia is that we've got a bad reading culture. That's why most of the time we tend to miss issues that are very critical and very important to the well-being of this great nation. With the comments State Council, as earlier alluded to, regarding the eligibility of His Excellency Edgar Chagwa Lungu, I think it is now clear, in black and white, that he doesn't qualify to stand in 2021 general election. Now, going forward from the learned colleagues, is there a way in which you can convince Zambians so that they understand and appreciate this topical issue, because it's very, very important? Is there a way in which Zambians can be convinced and agree to the fact that His Excellency doesn't qualify?
All right,
That's
Mr.
my
Mwenda.
contribution.
Sure. Thank you
so
very much. I'm sure, yes. We'll take more calls as we explain, but please keep the question of Mr. Mwenda, the conviction to Zambians. How do we handle this debate? You were explaining, Mr. Amy?
Yes, I was, and partially answering the last question is this very process that we're undertaking, where we take our time to come to a platform of this nature and give the facts as they stand on the ground, will help the people of Zambia out there. But let me continue with the point I was making. The questions that Reverend Pule and others who approached the Constitutional Court asked were 2 in principle. Basically, they asked whether or not President Lungu had served 2 terms. 2 full terms is the exact expression used in their application. And the second question was whether or not the President Lungu would be eligible for election at the end of this current term. Those were the 2 questions that were asked. And the Constitutional Court made it very clear at page 51 of its decision that it would not deal with the questions as they were put forward, because the law does not deal with issues of individuals. It looks holistically at what needs to be determined. It looks at how the law should be applied rather than at the individual. So it declined to answer the first question in the way it had been put forward by the applicants. It said, no, we do not deal with individuals as a Constitutional Court. We deal with the law because it's of universal application. And then the court went further and restated the question as it ought to have been put according to the court, and changed it in the following terms. The court then said the question should have read whether, in terms of Article 106, Sub-Article 3 and Sub-Article 6, a presidential term of office that ran from 25th January 2015 to 13th September 2016 and straddled 2 constitutional regimes can, and this is critical, can or should be considered as a full term. That was the way the Constitutional Court saw the issues that it had to deal with, okay? Whether or not that amounts to a full term. Okay. Then at page 72 of its judgment, the Constitutional Court restated the law. And I think we have gone at length to explain what sub-article 3 of Article 106 of the Constitution states. But let me just restate it for the avoidance of hold office for that less than 3-year term. See that it's about to end. But let's talk from a theoretical perspective. See that it's about to end, dissolve Parliament, and therefore the powers which allow for the dissolution of Parliament in certain circumstances, dissolve Parliament, go for election again, and can keep on doing that over and over and over again, because that term is not considered a term at law. That short term of less than 3 years. Then what is the outcome? You have the possibility of having a life president. If they decide to manipulate the constitution,
to Russia.
Exactly.
Okay.
So how do you cure that?
So-
Let's just end that thought. How do you cure that? You cure it, and the constitution is clear, as has been stated by my learned seniors. You cure it by having an Article 106, Sub-Article 3, which says once you've held office twice, that's it. That's the end.
Okay.
It prevents
So
abuse of that
your argument is that those that are saying that President Lungu is eligible to stand in 2021, they are lying, and the other group has also have branded people. I mean, Mr. Sangwa last week was called down. So
Yes.
let's see how this debate is turning out to be. We have a caller from Kangwa. Good evening.
Yes, good evening.
Yes, sir. Your contribution this evening.
Mine is not a contribution per se, it's a question which I probably should direct to KBF or indeed State Council Sangwa.
Okay.
It pertains to Article 106 Clause 6. So simply that Article 106 Clause 6 borders on defining a term limit. I should ask if indeed we need to define a term, simply that it has been misinterpreted exactly, especially by this ruling party, and that they raised this argument of whether or not President Lungu is eligible based on that. So is it necessary for us to define a term, or should we just stick to holding office twice? Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kangwa. I hope you did get that question. As you answer that, let's also remember the question that came through from our first caller. How do you intend to convince Zambians that they understand the issue of eligibility of the president in 2021?
Kangwa, thank you for that question. I tried to explain this so that people can understand, and I hope you'll get me now. The life of the presidency does not operate in a vacuum. The presidency is always attached to National Assembly. When he attends National Assembly, it's called Parliament. So please follow me. That is why when Rupiah Banda became president, he found Parliament, which was elected in 2006. He was elected in 2008, from where he could pick cabinet. In 2011, he had to dissolve that parliament, okay, and then rerun, but he lost. Mr. Sata came in. A new parliament was set up with a president called Michael Chufesa, may so rest in peace. When he died, parliament was not dissolved. We had a by-election. So the life of the presidency is with parliament. When parliament's term runs, the presidential term must run. That was the intention. And I don't see anywhere in the judgment, in the Concord judgment, that being discussed. But what's more, when the Concord, as my learned colleague Imbe has alluded to, when the Concord rephrased the question, they were now trying to answer the question based on the fact, according to my understanding, that one, President Lungu was not even part of this. He was not a party to this case. These were surrogate parties that were sponsored to go and ask the question. The candidate himself didn't go to court. President Lungu has never said, I want to run. No. When he says that, daggers will be drawn. And I can assure you, there are groups of people ready and willing to go and say, no. But Chuluba tried this. We said no.
When you say that there are groups of people, are they planning to protest?
No. We're talking about the rule of law here. Going to court. And it's just a friendly warning to the party in power. Don't find yourself in a catch-22 where you can elect a president under the PF Constitution who automatically becomes your Republican Party candidate, but can't stand because the Constitution will bar him. That's a catch-22. Why do you want to get into that? You've already served 2 terms. Why do you want to go to a convention and stand? When you know the Republican Constitution will tell you, no, you cannot. Why put the party into that inconvenience? Why?
Just after the Concord ruling, I think one of the first interviews that were given I mean, the reaction from the party through the Secretary General. They were so clear about it. The party has been so clear about it.
The Secretary
that
General
of the Patriotic Front.
Honorable Davis Mwin.
Yes.
Is he a lawyer?
I don't want to talk about his career credentials, but they've been so clear that President Lungu is their candidate in 2021.
You can sing
and number plates are driven around Lusaka City. ECL 2021.
Let's be very clear. You can sing all you want at the top of the mountain. Go to Mount Everest and sing. So candidate, 20 times, 100 times. The rule of law is what we're discussing here. Respect the Constitution.
And interestingly, there is a concept of assuming risk on the part of the Patriotic Front. Speaking as an interested person in all this that's unfolding, there's been omega of everything. And as a nation, it serves us best to follow the rule of law. That's really the point that I wanted to make. Otherwise, there could be consequences that may not be foreseen now, and people that are shouting from the rooftops will then stand to regret.
All right. You are from the opposition political party,
Yes.
and to be specific, the UPND.
Yes.
Others are saying they are scared of competition. No wonder they're so happy to contribute on the eligibility of President Edgar Lungu.
And you know, the last comment I've just made will basically deal with that particular assertion. It's not even about being scared of any particular candidate. We are a party that believes in the rule of law. And so when we see an issue that has got potential consequences on how the supreme law of the land is interpreted and how it is kept, it is our duty as law-abiding citizens and as persons who believe in the rule of law to add our voice to the arguments that are being put there in order to have a clear position of law. It's not about an individual, as the case may be. I'm quite certain that as a political party, we are ready to face any opponent that comes our way. So the issue is not as narrow as that. It should not be trivialized, as learned senior KBF mentioned. You don't trivialize these matters. Even if it's something to do with the other camp, one must be objective and must be able to think above their own personal interests and look at the national interest. We are here supporting the position that has been put forward because we want to be clear that the rule of law is above anything else, above our own interests, above the interests of individuals. It is the national interest first, and that is why we are speaking the way we speak about this debate. We'll be quite happy.
By the way, even if, let's say, we take out President Lungu, we put President HH, the argument will still be the same.
Quite
okay?
right.
That is the point. Because the law should not shift or change because of an individual. No. We're looking at the supremacy of the law. So even if, let's say, President HH was elected in 2015, January 2015, right? He was elected 2015 and also 2016. He would still not be eligible to stand in 2021. Okay? So this is not personal. I'm sure people have tried to personalize this thing to say, no, you have a problem with the Edgar Lungu or whatever. No. It's the law. So the law doesn't change. Even if it was my brother here who was elected president in 2015, although we both come from Flera, my argument will not change. I'll still tell him, my brother, you are not eligible to stand in 2021.
And I would gracefully.
That is what we mean by rule of law. Okay? Nobody is above the law.
Right.
I cannot begin to bring about or to be creative in my interpretation of the law to interpret the Constitution in a manner that suits him. No. Then I'm doing a disservice to the country and to the Constitution. So the Constitution, the law is blind. That's why we are saying we are all equal before the law. So it doesn't matter who is involved. If the law says if you have held office twice, it doesn't matter whether it's my brother here, or whoever it is, it doesn't matter. If you held the office of president twice, yes, then you are not eligible. Finished.
Interesting thing, KBF, is political discussions and reactions don't matter what has been said. It's who has said it. So the moment you advance your opinion on the president's qualification to stand in 2021, they'll say, wow, you have got an interest to be president.
No, let me be clear. I think just to buttress State Council's position, let's go to simple civics.
Sure.
Grade 5, grade 8, civics. If a question was to be posed in this way, how many times has Haga in the ECL lost elections? They'll say 5 times. Correct? Why? Because he participated, but did not win. How many times has Edgar Chagwa won elections? A, B, C, D. I would choose 2.
because I know he participated and won those two elections. Correct? It's simple civics. So you cannot argue that we're being personal here. It's nothing personal. No, it's the facts. We are lawyers, we look at the facts, and the facts stand as such. I am very happy with my brother from Kabompo. Was that the town? Who is worried about me, that I should be promulgating to stand as a president, and he says under PF. In politics, my brother, let me just give advice. You do not fight for the sake of fighting. You must be strategic. But if you want to change a particular political dispensation, you do not run away from a situation. What kind of leader are you? You try and solve the situation or the problems in that political party. I am appealing to the Patriotic Front to reconsider their thoughts on this position.
All right.
And that is all I'm saying.
Okay.
For me, it has nothing to do with whether or not I am the presidential candidate or not. But also, PF may not be the only party that one uses to run for office. There could be other political parties.
Okay.
But for now, I'm saying we have a chance to redeem the situation within PF, correct the wrongs, correct the perceptions, and give efficacy to what is due. Why? Because PF is a party that is still in power. Two, is still viable if certain amendments, certain decisions are changed. But if that doesn't happen, the doors are open.
Let's get to the phone lines. Good evening. Yes, Mr. Chadamlenga from Luasha. What is your contribution? Good evening, thank you.
The question is, if the issue is about the interpretation of the judgment of the Constitutional Court, why do two people apply for a stay of execution of that judgment and appeal to the Supreme Court for interpretation? Because I feel this is being contemptuous of what, when the court has ruled and they are given execution on the issue that the court has already ruled over. How are you going to guide us? Being senior counsel, because you want to guide us. The issue here is not ECL, the issue here is not the HH, not two people here. The issue is about the matter that is before court. What direction are you giving us?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mlenga. All right.
Yeah.
I think I will
Yeah.
get the answer of that one.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You know, there is this misconception. Of course, there are limitations on how much you can discuss a matter from the court. The only time you are limited or you are stopped from discussing a matter, it is when it is active in court. Right? Right now, the matter is over. Okay? The court sat and delivered its judgment. Once it is done, anybody is at liberty to express his opinion on that judgment. We are at liberty to criticize it. We are at liberty to break it down, to analyze it, to say whatever we want to say. Because courts are not immune from criticism. Okay? Again, when we say rule of law, that rule of law equally extends to the courts. Okay? Nobody is above the Constitution. Nobody is above the law. So even if the court have themselves breached the law, remember they're human beings, they can also make mistakes. We have the liberty to be able to talk about it and to demonstrate. For example, I have voiced, for example, the question that they posed. The court had no right to do that. Okay? It is a well-settled principle of law that the court is supposed to be impartial. Okay? First of all, the biggest error in that judgment was for the court to restate the question. Courts don't do that. When they think that your question is useless, they throw it out. Or they can give you to say, listen, they can tell you, go and amend it. That's what we do. I mean, my colleagues here will tell you. And nobody who has ever practiced law will tell you that the court has the power to begin to restate my case. No court can restate one's case. The court has to decide on my case the way I have stated it. If it lacks merit, they'll throw it out. Or if they think there is no need to throw it out, they'll say, can you go and amend? But the court cannot assume the responsibility to amend it. Because even the way because when you look at the original question of by Danpule, and what the court came up are two different questions. Totally different. Now, the reason we don't, the courts are not supposed to do that is there is always a potential of the court being accused of bias. The court has to be independent and impartial. You don't get involved in reframing. Now, even if they do, what the court should have done and call the parties, gentlemen, come here. Ladies and gentlemen, come here. We think your question ought to have read this. Do you agree? The other party say, yes, we agree, we agree. Now, can you address us now? On the rephrase the question. That's the procedure. Okay? Now, you took, because all those parties who were present before court, they were addressing their mind to the question as posed in the papers filed by Danpule. Okay? And all the arguments were directed towards that question. Now you take arguments meant for a certain question, you apply them to a different question. Doesn't work that way. That is lawlessness we're talking about. Even courts are bound by the rules. We're talking about rule of law. Rule of law extends to the courts as well. Nobody is above the law. The fact that you are a judge doesn't mean that you can violate the law and decide the case in whichever manner you want. No, that's not the position. Secondly, this issue, first of all, there is no procedure to appeal to the Supreme Court. Okay? This is the problem. Not really the problem, but this is the issue about our constitutional court. Your case begins and ends in the constitutional court. Now, having said that, it entitles me to go back, if I want to go back to the court and say, like my brother Imbe said, when we are dealing with this particular issue to do with the interpretation of these clauses, it was based on an hypothetical situation where we are saying, is he eligible, and so forth. Now, we have passed that. We just have to wait for next year for the ECZ to appoint a date for nomination. Let's see what is going to happen. You see, if somebody who is not eligible to stand files his papers, we'll go to court because there's already a procedure set. Okay? So here, we're not trying to say there is nothing like disobeying the order, the stay of execution. There is nothing to stay in that judgment because there is nothing which is contained in that document which is capable of enforcement. There is nothing. So you stay when you are ordered. The court made no order in that particular judgment. So there is nothing to stay. So when we talk about these things, we're not disobeying. In fact, our ability to discuss and debate this judgment is part of rule of law. Okay? We are actually holding the court accountable. We are now telling some of our views, they may look at them, yeah, I think they make sense. Or they may say my views are rubbish. That's entirely up to them. But the point, the message we are sending to the judges is that you are not above the law. We will also hold you accountable as a judge. So the point is that, yes, we have to respect. But that doesn't mean that when we criticize, it means we're disrespecting the court. No. Nobody is above criticism. No.
And the very fact that there is a potential of criticism, that in itself is sufficient to cause the court to be careful when they write judgments. I'll give you an example. Look at Malawi, small country, poorer than Zambia. They had the elections annulled. The court did not just stop by saying the elections are annulled. They went further. What is the implication of us annulling the elections? They said we'll go back to the position that was there before the elections. You, who was vice president, go back. Next, what is the problem? The problem with this system is that we have the first past the post system, which is very bad. Change the system, provide for a 50+1. Next, the court ordered that the members of Malawi Electoral Commission, they were incompetent. Can the National Assembly look, their parliament look at them whether these people are competent to hold elections? Correct. That is a court finding a solution to a national problem. You don't just end up by saying, I declare this. No, you look at the ramifications of your election, of your decision. By the way, I don't know whether you're aware of this. The Supreme Court of Malawi has refused to stay the judgment, by the way. Okay? And the court ordered that fresh elections should be held within 150 days. So Malawi is now preparing for the elections. That is the way a court is supposed to operate. When you issue a judgment, we shouldn't be talking about going back to court for interpretation. No, the judgment must be complete in itself.
Should we say that we blame the courts for having this debate?
No. I don't think blame must be apportioned on the courts per se. You must understand that the Constitutional Court is a new court, first of all. We are developing jurisprudence within the court, and we are also learning from what other jurisdictions are doing. But whatever happens outside has no bearing in Zambia unless the cases are similar. Therefore, our particular set of circumstances will be analyzed as such based on our law and the circumstances prevailing in Zambia. So the judges may also be on a learning curve, which is normal, totally normal. Because if you give new judges new powers within a certain confinement, a certain law, and you say this is the way you're going to operate, they'll have to look at precedents. Now, if there's no precedent that is similar to Zambia, which falls on all fours, as we say, meaning it can fit like hand and glove, it's difficult for the judges to come up with decisions just like that. They have to think outside the box and look at the circumstances. But also bearing in mind that the judges are not there to cause confusion. They're there to pronounce what the law is, but also offer guidance to say the amicable solution to, as in the case of Malawi, is follow this procedure, and we think the nation will heal based on what we have guided, which is normal.
Right.
So for the Zambian situation,